Maybe just to say one word on the former guidelines. The ITTO prepared in 2002 and published in 2002 guidelines on forest restoration, tropical forests, which at the time was the first time that such guidelines had been prepared. It was followed by another technical paper on forest restoration. So ITTO was somehow in these years 2002, 2005, the pioneer of working on forest restoration, tropical forest restoration. Over the years, this topic has been developing very much at international level. With the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the world community, it has become a very prominent topic with a specific SDG. And since then, the international community has worked quite a lot on this topic. That also means that was based partly on the concept that ITTO had already developed some 15 years ago. Now, when you see this development and this interest on this topic, it is also worth for ITTO to relook at its own guidelines of what has been done, how we had implemented these guidelines, and what we could in this new world, 15 years later, what we could contribute in the international level. So this would be, let's say, the rationale, the basis why ITTO looks again at these guidelines. I had the chance at the time, 2001, 2002, to work already on the first guidelines with my colleague Cesar Sabogal from Peru. And luckily, ITTO asked us to team up again, some 18 years later, and to look at the guidelines and to adapt our guidelines to the new environment. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about how we work and where we are, indeed, the institutional environment has changed in a way that is, how can we tell it, not dramatic, but dramatic in the positive sense, because the interest on the topic has been rising enormously. We have 13 international organizations working on forest restoration. So we had to see what our specific niche, and if our specific niche in ITTO is still there. And ITTO's specific niche to work on sustainable tropical forest management for production and protection. This niche indeed is still there because the international community has worked the forest restoration portfolio more from a landscape approach, from using overall, the changed landscapes in the tropics, with population growth and more intensive use of natural resources. The landscape has changed dramatically in many countries of the world in the tropics. So you look at at restoration from a wider angle, and this wider angle is called landscape restoration. And in this respect, there we work with these new guidelines on how we fit, with our specific approach to restore, to manage sustainably at the end tropical forests, if they are in large scale, in areas where you still have large scale forests, and there are degradation for different reasons, or at local level where you have mosaic landscapes where the forest has gone already to big parts and there are still remaining forests that are worth to maintain and to restore in many circumstances. So what we try to do with these new guidelines compared with the old guidelines is indeed to integrate this forest restoration idea into that wider landscape package. So this is indeed, let's say, the new thing that we try to do. How we work, so I said, so we first explored what is the current landscape, who is doing what, to what extent, what kind of guidelines do we have out there now, because when we were 2002, it was the only guidelines. Today there are 8 guidelines on different circumstances. The guidelines for tropical dry forests, there are guidelines for for mangrove forests. No, there are guidelines where we have some link to establish. So we deployed first this environment, this institutional environment. And then we brought our ideas here to the ITTO. So because the ITTO is a very democratically organized institution, so we asked guidance to the council how they want to see a revision of the guidelines. So this is the stage where we are now, and we are going into an expert panel meeting. So ITTO invited 20 to 25 experts for a meeting where we expose the experts with our ideas as consultants and with the guidance we got from the council, and that will be the so-called expert panel meeting on the revision of the ITTO guidelines. And based on this work, we will draft sort of a first guidelines package, which is a document, but in the same time also a sort of a reference element, maybe a sort of a clearinghouse on forest landscape restoration. Prepare that and present that to the next council session for discussion and approval.